There's a group of people that say that dragons were real. So around the same time period in, China, South America, Africa, all these different Rome, all these places, images depicted people fighting dragons, right? And every dragon was slightly different, but it was all a giant, scaly animal that could fly. The group that says this, they're saying the evidence is the reason there's no fossils of dragons is because they had bird bones and hollowish bones. They break down very easily and they don't fossilize. If there were lizards big enough to fly around and eat people, they didn't have bones that could fossilize. A small population of these giant flying lizards existed and encompassed all these different countries where they all depicted fighting dragons in their own way, and they were all killed off by, knights or whatever it is, and then didn't fossilize.
Back in 2017 in Shinjuku, China, 120 miles outside of Beijing in a rural community, locals find a massive set of bones measuring a whopping 60 feet in length. However, these aren't your ordinary bones. These bones belong to a highly unusual animal that had everyone scratching their heads trying to figure out what it could be. The remains, unearthed in Zhangjiakou, had antlers, prominent claws, and a long serpentine body. The discovery went viral on the internet, and people were losing their minds trying to identify this bizarre creature. But local villagers were convinced that the bones belonged to none other than a dragon. Now, we all know that dragons are a big deal in Chinese culture. They're everywhere, from Chinese artwork to their literature. They represent knowledge, wisdom, and otherworldly power. Even some of the early imperial families associated themselves with dragon blood, or at least portrayed themselves as descendants of dragons. So when the villagers claimed that these bones were from a dragon, it created a massive media frenzy. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Dragons? Really? But you'd be surprised. Dragons are a significant part of folklore and mythology across different cultures and time periods. They're not just in China, but they're all over the world, even in Western culture. In fact, in some passages of the Bible, Satan is described as a dragon. Dragons are also one of the most powerful animal gods in Aboriginal mythology, and we have them in Ethiopian iconography too. But what's truly fascinating is that despite being present in so many different cultures, the representation of what a dragon is supposed to look like remains remarkably consistent over time. It's almost as if there's some universal understanding of what a dragon should look like, even across cultures that never had contact within history. So whether or not the bones discovered in Zhangjiakou belong to a real dragon, the fact that so many people worldwide believe in their existence speaks volumes about the pervasiveness of dragon myths and cultures across the globe. When we think about dragons, we usually think of these mythical creatures that only exist in our imagination. But what if they were actually real? It's a thought that sends shivers down your spine. And it's not just modern sightings that we're talking about here. We're talking about historical accounts dating back centuries. These were people who actually saw these creatures with their own eyes and documented their encounters. We're talking about stories that were passed down from generation to generation, not as myths, but as actual historical events. Take the example of the Roman army in the 8th century. They encountered a large creature that was described as a dragon, and they actually killed it and brought its skin back to Rome as proof. This was a real animal that they encountered, not just a figment of their imagination. And then there's the story of the dragon fighter in Worms, Germany. In the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, they hung up dragon bones all across the city to prove that dragons were real. They took it so seriously that they actually had to prove it to themselves and to the world. Now fast forward to the early 1900s, and we have the Van Meter visitor. This was a giant 8-foot bat-like creature with huge leather wings and a horn on its head that could project a light. For 5 nights, it terrorized the small town of Van Meter, Iowa, before disappearing into a coal mine and never being seen again. So the question is, could giant winged serpents still exist today? Some researchers say yes, and they point to these historical accounts and modern sightings as evidence. It's a fascinating topic, and one that we'll explore more in depth in the future.